All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this session of Leverage AI to drive better API product decisions. And I'm glad to see everyone here. I'd love it if people can put in the chats where they're calling from and what their job title is, or your most recent uh, job title. Say hi to people. Like, for example, I'm Emmanuel. I'm a company founder, Maven instructor, and I'm calling in from San Francisco. All right. Hey, Michael, Ara, product manager. Awesome. Great. Shaliza is a recent PM. You're in the right place. Okay. Heather is a co-founder. Awesome. So let's get started with this session. And just to introduce myself, my name is Emmanuel Paraskakis. I'm API product manager. Have been for about 15 years now, and I now instruct on Maven. I have courses for API product managers on Maven. We'll talk about the courses a little bit at the end. But today I wanted to welcome Derric Gilling, my friend and CEO of Moesif. Derric, tell us a little bit about yourself, Moesif, and I guess why you started Moesif.
Sure, definitely. So happy to be here, joining and discussing on really how to better treat APIs as products and be a better API product manager. We started Mosa really to empower product and business teams to really take their API program to the next step. And what we saw was there's a lot of tooling around solving the infrastructure side of things, API gateways, API management, DevOps, and everything else. But there was a lack of tooling really focused around the product and business side, which is main focus for Mosif. We're an AP analytics and monetization platform.
Yeah. And today we're going to be here to do a hands-on session. I'd like everybody to try to either go to tinyurl/Mosif demo or scan this QR code. You'll get access to the demo environment with realistic data that the folks at Mosif use to basically demo their products, and you'll be able to follow along. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, here's a data set that's going to approximate what you might have, what you might see in your traffic in your API products. Here's some dashboards you can build, some metrics you can get off that data. And Derric is going to demo some of the AI features which allow you to ask questions of the data that I think are really, really powerful. And I was really impressed when I saw them. So try to scan this QR code, try to get this URL, try to get online. We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to get online, but it'd be great if you can follow along instead of us just showing you things. If you can try it out yourself. And if anybody gets stuck, throw a question in the chat here, and I'll put the actual URL behind tiny URL in the chat just in case anybody gets stuck. So if you hit this URL, you'll be able to log in and follow along in the demo yourself. And so you have the link, you have the QR code. Let me go on and say what we're going to be talking about in this session. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about what metrics you should be tracking as an API product manager. There's a lot of engineering metrics that get thrown out at us, but what's good for API product managers? Then we're going to jump into a live demo, which you can follow along with, and we're going to show what the analytics and the dashboards might look like and how you can customize them for your own needs. And then we're going to show the AI features that allow you to ask questions, interpret the data, and really inform your product roadmap. And then we'll talk about some next steps, what you can do to learn more, and we'll open it up for Q&A. And I guess if you have questions, start throwing them in the chats. Maybe people can upvote them with emojis and so on. But start throwing them in the chat, and we'll get to the questions at the end of the session. All right. So, can I get a thumbs up emoji from folks that were able to get registered in the demo and are able to look at the demo? Yeah, I see one. Michael, Patrick, Brenda. Okay, people are getting it. Heather is in progress. All right, so let me start talking a little bit about the metrics, and hopefully we'll move along with the demo. Now, um, when I was an early product manager, and maybe you're like me, I would get all these metrics from engineering. I would get like the CPU consumption and uptime and latency and things like that. And those were good metrics around my APIs, but it didn't help me understand things like prioritization, things like what features I need to build, what people are missing, and so on. I could only get this information by talking to people, and that was good, but it wouldn't really scale. So over time, I started asking and learning about metrics like, let's say, active users, monthly active users, or weekly active users, or the number of API keys that we have out there. And eventually got to the point where the most bang for my buck was figuring out what was happening with my developer portal funnel. And a developer portal looks, or the experience for developers signing on into a developer portal looks something like what's on this slide. People go through a discovery stage where they try to learn about what your API is for, what's its purpose is, and so on. They go through a phase where they try to learn how to call your API, maybe get their credentials, make that first API call, and then they start doing more with the API in your tools. They may start building an app, and then they may eventually, buy or get onto a paid tier of your API and build really something that others can consume, a production ready app. And if it's really successful, they may expand their usage. And what I would say to you is that your aim as a product manager for your developer portal is to get developers through the early stage of discovery all the way out to the right to retention as quickly and with as few obstacles as possible. And in order to do that, you have to be measuring what's happening, right? The higher the number of people and the quicker they get through all these stages, the better job you're going to be doing. So you're going to be measuring things like the number of visitors dropping into my portal, and then how many of these visitors and how quick they convert to signups. When they make those signups make their first API call, which means they were able to get credentials. They were able to figure out how to call your API, what the URL is, what the mechanics of your API are, and so on. And then perhaps they started building something, making more API calls, making different API calls, maybe sharing with others, maybe putting an app together that they share with others. And eventually, some of those folks will get onto your paid plan if you have a paid plan. And once they have an app in the wild, in production, if the app is successful, they will expand. You will see more usage out of them. So all of these are things that you should be measuring in terms of percentages as a funnel and time. But how do you measure them? Well, the answer is with product analytics. And you know that, but sometimes with APIs, it's difficult because the product analytics tools that are out there are not always suitable for APIs. And I've been in every quadrant of these. I've been in every situation where, maybe in some situations I didn't have any analytics at all. And that's really untenable because I'm flying blind. I can't know what my product is doing. And maybe in other situations, I had few analytics. I could get access to them, but they weren't describing the full picture. And usually that was the case when there were homegrown analytics. I kept asking for more dashboards and more things from my engineering team, and they would build it as they could. And then there's the other case, which is kind of equally as bad, where we got a full suite of analytics. It's measuring things and tracking metrics, for my traffic. But really, to use them as a product manager, I would have to go to engineering. I would have to go to maybe a data scientist and say, hey, um, I want to know how many, how quickly are people making that first API call, the time to first hello world, as we call it. And people would be like, oh yeah, put a ticket here on my backlog and we'll create a dashboard for you. And then when I needed that information again, I had to go asking for it again. So that was not great. But the ideal situation was as a PM, I could self-serve and go ask questions of the data anytime I wanted. Anytime I got asked questions, I could go and ask questions of the data. And I could then inform my roadmap and make real decisions. So up until recently, that wasn't really the case. But I think with advances in AI, we're able to do that, right? Because AI can look at the data and answer questions that we have. So I do want to hand it over to Derric now, who's going to walk us through a scenario. And Derric, why don't you walk us through the setup here, what the scenario is, and what the benefit is to product managers, how they're going to interpret this.
Sure, definitely. Just speaking on this scenario a little further, I'm going to walk through really three key areas or three different types of product metrics product managers typically focus on. The first is around adoption, and then there's typically engagement metrics, and then lastly, there's expansion and retention. And so in terms of the setup, assuming that you're the only API product manager in your org, main goal is you're trying to optimize around paid signups, but you also want to land and expand them, right? And we see this a lot within API-based products. Folks will sign up, get started, may take the tires for a little while. The main goal is really to drive them to that next stage, that next step, which allows them to continue to use more of your endpoints, more of your APIs, more functionality around the APIs, and then trying to understand how to prioritize that from a marketing standpoint. So I'm going to actually share my screen
Cool.
here.
So let me stop sharing so you can share. And I just like to ask a quick question from the participants here. Maybe you can put in the chat. Who has API product analytics today, even if they're hard to use, or even if they're partial API product analytics? Put in the chat. Do you have them? Yes, no. Maybe how hard they are to use. Okay, Haruki has them. Great. It's awesome. Andrew doesn't. Okay, fantastic. Well, hopefully, Haruki that has them, and Angela can, help us a little bit here, can chime in at the end with what types of metrics they're also counting. And Richard says, hey, yes, but only high-level logs in AWS. That's very typical. And Habib is talking about core networking analytics. That's very typical of some shops. And hopefully you'll see some more stuff here that you can get inspired by. But yeah, Derric, take it away.
Appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm just jumping into Moesif here and just looking at one of the default dashboards. For context, this is a GenAI API. That's the type of traffic that we're tracking here. And these are all, of course, drag and drop, so you can customize this, to the T. But I'm going to jump into one of my favorite metrics, which is how to actually measure and understand time to first API call. But I typically will say time to first hello world. And how do we actually understand how they're progressing through that customer journey? So I'm going to jump into a funnel report here. And a lot of times what we want to understand is how do folks start from, say, a doc visit, which I'm going to give it a name here. And then I'm going to pick on that action, view docs. I'm going to skip ahead. We'll click view landing. And we're going to say hello world, right? In this case, what I'm really curious about is how long does it take for someone to make a very first embeddings API? Because that's what I have in this demo. So I'm going to punch in embeddings/generate.
So you're saying here, I'm interested in that one specific route or API call. That's significant to me. When they hit that, it means that they've done something valuable, or something that's valuable to them.
Exactly. And we're going to add one more step, because when you do your first hello world, technically you're not really fully up and running yet. You might be using Postman, you might be using curl to just kick the tires, experiment with the API. So we'll say over 100 embedding tokens. So I'm going to add one more filter here. We're going to add that exact same endpoint here, which is that embeddings. If I can spell correctly. We're going to add a threshold. I want to find out once they get to the input token count is greater than 100.
Okay, so
That's
that means
what we're
they
setting.
made what, 100 API calls, or calls that were worth 100 tokens for this AI API?
You actually brought up a really key point here, which I'm not necessarily just looking at API calls, because each API is different. Customers might use a batch endpoint and send 100 text messages through the same API call, or that API call may be not relevant. Maybe just a health probe or something that is
Mhm.
less valuable from a business sense. And so what I'm building out here is this 4-stage or 4-step funnel. First is view doc page, view my API docs. Second step is I signed into the application. And then the third step here, which I should actually remove the view landing here. Third step is making that very first API call to the embeddings let's generate. And then the fourth step is, did the customer use up more than 100 input tokens? And so we can look at business level information, such as in the headers, the body, the payload, that is relevant for the business. And what we see here is a lot of people did make the very first API call. Over 87% converted and did something through, say, Postman. But once we look at the real picture, which is how many people consumed over 100 input tokens, we saw that it drops off to around 5%. And now if we want to understand, well, what marketing channels should I be focused on as an organization, we can start slicing and dicing this data. And we always recommend tracking things like UTM parameters from a marketing standpoint. So I'm going to show a group by UTM source. And now this starts giving a little bit of a better picture of what is happening here. We see AdWords converts around 9.5%. And we see Facebook ads converts around 6%. We see some of these other channels like Reddit, 0. So maybe I don't want to spend as much time or investment into Reddit. And so what we can see here is not only the conversion rate for these different channels, but how long does it take? And we can see here that AdWords takes about a day and 12 hours for a new customer who signed up to get to that threshold of over 100 input tokens. Again, so we're trying to understand how long is it taking, and then what is that conversion rate to get to that key goal. And I like to describe that as an aha moment, as a new developer is getting up and running with the API. Because when you're first using that API call through Postman, you get to experiment, you get to see what it's doing, but it's not really until you see a lot of value through the API, that's when your eyes are able to light up and say, wow, okay, I was able to build something cool here, and I was able to use over 100 input tokens to do some cool processing or do something else in my application. And so
So this
that's
lets
just
you
talk.
lets you understand where you should place your bets from a marketing or campaign perspective.
Exactly. And we can slice and dice this by different ways. So right now I'm looking at it from a marketing standpoint, but let's say we want to understand by different plans, right?
Mhm.
What plans are the most valuable and how are they converting? Should I focus on enterprise? Should I focus on self-service? And here we can see a similar breakdown of, it looks like our standard plan is actually doing quite well with around 9% is converting. Our basic plan pretty low. It's only 2%. Maybe there's a lack of functionality, or you weren't really able to see value from this basic tier, and it may require adding more capabilities when you think about your packaging and pricing to make sure they are able to see and get to that aha moment. And one of the things I've seen, through different APA programs is being too constrained during a free trial, where if you don't see value immediately, then you leave and try and
Mhm.
start exploring a different competitor or a different platform. So that's covering more the adoption and activation side of things. Now understand how active people really are around the platform. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in time series here. And let's say I just want to understand the growth rate of different customers. Are people expanding? Are people relatively flat in terms of the usage? And so right now I'm just going to take a look at their daily usage here. And we just want to break this down by company. And here we see the top 5 companies. And we can actually see some interesting insights. Postman drop down. We see some new folks like Eventbrite is starting to pick up their usage. But I want to understand what is happening here from a growth standpoint. Because in absolute terms, you could have a large customer, could have a large drop off, but if they're already at high volumes, maybe it doesn't really matter as much. So let's take a look at growth rate. Now this gives a little bit of a better picture that Revel here had a massive spike in usage. And if I want to summarize this, let's actually ask AI, which customers are having large expansion and spikes. Just give it a second here.
Wow.
And it actually gave me a quick summary that I can use here to understand what is happening. It says Postman Revel showed large expansion and spike, especially on February 27th. We see this other company, not quite as high, but also interesting for me to look at. Now, why is this important? Let's say I have a usage-based model, right? So one of our customers, u.com, they have a usage-based model. They want to make sure that as a customer is increasing, they're increasing and expanding at a good clip and not at a bad clip. The worst thing that can happen is a billing surprise. I, as a developer, sign up expecting to pay a couple $100s a month, and then I get a $10,000 bill. No customer wants to explain to their manager why they got a $10,000 bill. And so by understanding the dynamics of how customers are growing or dropping off, it allows you to really try and optimize both your pricing and packaging strategy, but also what can be placed inside the application to help mitigate some of these concerns that a customer might have. If I want to dig into this a little deeper, I might want to understand not just the growth rate by different customers, but what are they actually using around the API? So I'm going to switch to a slightly different view here. Just looking at company domain. I'm going to look at now the top APIs. Page here. And so what I'm looking at here now is for these different APIs. Oops. I can see the different companies. So Eventbrite, I can see is using a lot more of this API. Let's actually put this in table. It's easier to see. There we go. All right. So now we can see a breakdown of companies on the left side here, and then APIs at the top here. And now I can actually understand which customer has different usage pattern for endpoints. And now we get a breakdown of how different customers are actually using the API differently. So we can see Postman looks like they're using the API core in the API trained model, which is fairly evenly distributed. But then Twitter, it looks like they just keep calling the slash endpoint. Maybe they're not really doing much. They got up and running, but the fact that they're just calling this basic endpoint, which is the root level, tells me they might not be getting as much value as one would expect. But now we can actually tweak this chart. We were looking initially at event count. Let's make sure that, is this creating anything of business value? Because API calls does not necessarily equal business value. So I'm going to go ahead and build another metric here. And we're going to go add that field we looked at earlier. Put token count. The metadata output token count.
And again, that's the value metric or the usage metric for this particular API, right?
Exactly. And what I'm going to add one more here is let's divide B divided by A.
So can you explain that? What does that mean? You're kind of doing a calculation on these two
So what I'm
metrics,
trying to understand here is event count is API call volume.
which is
Then we
A.
have another field, output token count, or actually I picked the wrong one here, input token count. And then we're doing the B divided by A.
Okay.
Now, looks like this data doesn't have anything, so I'll show the other one. Because what I'm trying to understand here is, oh, why is there 0? This is the bad demo, actually. There we go. Okay. Now I can actually show this correctly. What I'm trying to show here is for each of these API calls, there may be one token used or it might be thousands of tokens used. And so I can see on average how many tokens relative to the number of API calls. And so I want to start encouraging folks to use more tokens relative to the number of API calls that they're using. And you can apply this to really any business. So for example, if you're a SMS API, so one of our customers is Cinch, and so they have a lot of different communications APIs. They want to make sure, are they actually batching up their requests, right? Is it sending one fax, one SMS in one transaction, or are they able to batch those up, which allows them to use the API more efficiently? And so I can actually now build out these metrics on how efficient these different customers are using the API.
Gotcha. And again, this is notional data or example data that you have that you're basing this off of. What's the source of the data that you have? Is it just synthetic data?
In this demo data, this is synthetic data, but in terms of what it actually looks like to get up and running as a new product manager, typically it's a quick discussion with the engineering team,
Mm-hmm.
connecting Moesif to Kong or W2 or Amazon Gateway.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a API management platform in place already, or if you don't, you can also use one of the server integrations. Our goal is get up and running in that 15-20 minute time frame, so you can actually start experimenting with the data, see what those volume levels are like, and then start taking action on it, right? So setting up alerts, Slack alerts when a new customer has a spike in usage or a drop off, because a lot of times drop off could be indication of churn risk, right? If they actually start reducing the number of APIs or reducing the volume, number of input tokens that they're consuming, that may mean they're not seeing as much value as they used to.
Okay. And real quick question about the AI behind this. So is this a situation where you bring your own model, or is this like Moesif's model? Is it your trained model, or is it, some other model that you use, Azure or OpenAI?
Yeah, so this is using Azure OpenAI underneath the hood. There is no training done on your data. This data stays private to the organization. In fact, you can even encrypt it with our client-side encryption feature, which allows you to bring your own encryption keys. But yes, I mean, large companies like London Stock Exchange, for example, is using Moesif, and that data is relatively sensitive, and we want to make sure that data stays private to the organization.
Gotcha. And you mentioned London Stock Exchange. I think you mentioned to me Siemens as a client.
Yeah.
Those seem like very big companies. For a new product manager, and in a smaller organization, what would you say? What is the go-to? How do they get started here? Assuming they have the data and they're collecting the data, and now they're jumping into these dashboards. Where do they start?
The first way to start is signing up for Moesif, and right within our chat, you can reach out and we can help you, get up and running with the engineering team. Usually takes about, an hour, a couple hours once you get everything aligned there, and there's a free trial. And then it's a matter of just, experimenting with the data, right? So starting off with this create new button and seeing what we can build, right? And you're going to get a lot of these dashboards out of the box automatically, right? So I'm looking at this product dashboard. If I go to CS, we see another set of different dashboards, like customers running into rate limits or folks who stop sending traffic. You'll get a lot of these out of the box. So just my recommendation is experiment, right? Jump into these, see what it looks like, and then use the Ask AI feature, to explain this further, right? So if I jump into this, ask what's going on here, right? So what's
And you would
interesting
use
from
like
this data.
kind of regular prompting techniques, or you treat it like a regular prompt? Is that the way you'd recommend to ask questions?
Yeah, so explain to me what is going on here.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think of it as ChatGPT merged with your API analytics data.
Gotcha. You had some of these actions and events defined in there. I'm assuming there is some kind of setup time, or these have to be baked in to the way you collect metrics. Is that kind of different from client to client? Would I have to do something to set up these actions?
So the nice thing about the Moesif platform is once you install the API gateway integration, or you can also even use our open telemetry integration. We got a couple of different ways to get data in Moesif. It's pretty much automatic, right? So if I click on, say calling here, it's a matter of just installing the little rock and then enabling plugin. Same thing with Delta 2, right? So you can come in and copy your application ID, sign up for a Choreo account, and you start seeing the data flow with those two and Moesif. And you can actually
So,
mix and match these as well. So if you have, as your organization grows and a new a product org is added and they have their own technology stack, you can include them as well in your analytics data. Now,
yeah,
why is that important is as a product manager, it's important to understand how different products and how different businesses are actually performing against each other, right? And if you want to start packaging APIs into new products, you can start using these as building blocks or as Legos and then repackage those. And having that unified view of usage data really helps, drive that at the organization.
okay, great, great. So, okay, what else could PMs benefit from? And should we move on to Q&A? What do you think? Anything else you can show? What
Sure.
if I want to see something real simple, like monthly active users? I get asked by my stakeholders, hey, how are we doing? Like a simple metric like that.
I'm going to walk through. So one thing we always recommend is looking at unique users, but there's always a little bit of a context to unique users. So right now, I'm going to pull up unique users per day. And we
Mhm.
always see, this is very common for B2B products, is you'll see a dip on the weekends versus the weekdays. And you'll see it's actually accumulating a little bit. But I also want to understand how engaged my user base is. Because right now, this is just giving a total count. Now, it doesn't really tell me, are they still relatively active, not active? So we're going to plot in another metric. We're going to say unique users. And I'm going to say add a rolling window. And we're going to say the trailing 7 days. Now, why am I showing both unique users and the trailing 7 days? Because the top is daily active users. The bottom, which is B, the yellow, is weekly active users. And then now we're going to add a formula to understand A divided by B. And we're going to actually divide it, hide these other ones. And now this is actually shown an idea of engagement, right? And we can see about around 50 to 60% of our weekly active users are daily active users versus weekly active users. And this shows that it's actually a highly engaged product, right? Having something around above 50% is actually very advantageous to me, right? Whereas if it was only like say 10%, that tells me people are not that active, right? They came in and did something but then left. And maybe they come in the next week and then left, right? And so they're poking around with different APIs, but they're not really active each day, right? And so we can actually build out these different types of metrics and understand this further, right? So if we want to, again, group by different APIs, different functions, and let's add one more filter here, event type,
And all this
API cost.
customization you're doing is something that a product manager could do themselves, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It looks like it's really only this, we could look at the roughly almost identical between the different APIs here, probably because it's demo data, but we can see that breakdown between the different folks here, or different APIs across the engagement level.
All right, cool. So I see some questions popping up in the chat. So I think we can go like we can talk about some quick takeaways from this, some next actions, and then go into the Q&A. And for folks that were able to log into the demo, you have access to this. You can play around. I think you can contact Derric. He'll drop his email in the chat later. You can contact him with questions even later. Share the demo link. I will do that right away. I think it was above. Let me copy it.
Just to kind of touch on a couple of questions here real quick for Pendo versus Datadog. So Datadog focuses mostly around site reliability type metrics. So if you want to, of course, track CPU performance around that perspective, Datadog is going to be a much better tool for that, right? For some understanding revenue, usage metrics, that type of stuff, that's really where Moesif shines, right? So in this case, understanding things like revenue broken down by different products, right? So I see my embeddings API versus my text API. Similarly, different customers and what are they doing? So if I want to jump into a customer here, understanding what does their usage and amount look like. So in this case, I'm looking at Bonjoro. They have an active subscription, and we can see exactly how much usage they had around the API for different products that they have set up. The other question, we do support GraphQL, we support JSON RPC, which is actually very relevant for all the MCP stuff that we keep hearing right now. So you can actually use this for understanding some of that traffic as well. I would say most of it is actually more like a Pendo than a Datadog, and that the main focus is really around product usage, understanding business value from that usage. Differences, of course, in the API world, it's very high dimension, high cardinality data, right? And so if you try and shove an API call into something like a Pendo, you're probably going to have a bad experience because you really are just tracking very small actions like a button click. You can't really dig deep into the payloads and build all the reports that I'm showing here if you want to dig into those payloads and everything else. Most of the supports full body analytics, so you can, if you have a customer that's querying your API, it's not just looking at the API calls, it's also digging into the exact queries that they're making and trying to pull together data around that. I think I have an example here real quick of what I mean by that. So this is the e-signature API, and I can see in the response body title, right? So we have all these, we can see what is the volume based off of this field I have, which is a string title. And then we can see that financial report title is actually at the top of the list. So again, building out more of those business level metrics is a key piece.
And would you say that Moesif is kind of more purpose made for APIs and aware of all the elements of an HTTP or API call?
That's correct. So, just jumping into a very basic event log here, right? So here I'm just looking at event log and we can get a sense of, status code, latency, all the other information that you typically see around your API traffic. And in fact, if I want to replay these, I can do so with the curl or download this to Postman. But it's really you can think of it as a Pendo for API-based products. And so if you're trying to build an API platform, more B2B facing, that's where Moesif is really going to shine. Of course, if you're building just a traditional React-based web application and you're not building APIs or trying to productize APIs, then I'd probably recommend Pendo instead for that use case, because you're not really looking at usage.
Okay, so let's jump off the demo, go a little bit into our wrap up, and then we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. I see all the questions coming up in the chat, so let's do that real quick. So in terms of some key takeaways, Derric, do you want to walk through these?
Sure, definitely. So one of the most important things is good data is what drives good product strategy. And I say this because you start doing weird things when you start matching together a couple of different disparate tools. And a lot of times what happens there is you have revenue in one system, you have product usage data in another system, performance level stuff in another system. And that makes it very hard to get a complete picture of your API experience, your customer experience. I do like to speak on, your developer funnel, time to first hello world, and time to working app. Just because a new developer made a single API call does not really mean they got to their aha moment yet.
Mhm.
And so understanding, what gets them to see that aha moment is a key piece. And lastly, number of API calls does not necessarily equal business value, right? I could make 1,000 API calls to a health probe
Yeah.
of some sort. Doesn't really mean I saw anything valuable through the API. Versus I could make one API call that was able to send 100 text messages and reach 100 new leads. Let's say I'm trying to generate sales leads or something. That's generating a lot more business value through the API. So having a good sense of what does the customers and developers get out of the API is a key piece. Lastly, try and make sure make sure you have trust in the data. We've seen issues, with sometimes homegrown systems where
Yeah.
you have this logs, but less trust in that data. And so many times then you're better off going by gut feeling versus trying to trust data that leads you in the wrong product strategy.
Yeah, I think and the last part is the game changer here because we've had capabilities like this in the past, but they've just been either difficult to use or it just took time and effort to use them, and that meant that people or product managers just weren't able to get access to them. I remember having to go back and ask the same question over and over again from the specialists and the engineers, and that puts friction on the decisions, the kind of decisions that I could make for my roadmap. So that the AI part is like super really important. Just quick next steps. We'll talk a little bit more about metrics. I'll send a metrics kind of cheat sheets in the email tomorrow with the recording. Definitely go sign up for Moesif. Read. I like their blog. I like the Moesif blog. There's a lot for product managers. There are lots of posts about product management. And if you have questions around Moesif, maybe Derek can throw an email in the chat for people to follow up on. If you want to learn more about API product management, I'll talk about my course that I have on Maven in the next slide. And if you want to dig in deeper on what's happening with API analytics, go and find Deepa Goyal's book on, let's say, Amazon. I think it's on Kindle as well as a regular book. It's called API Analytics for Product Managers. She literally wrote the book on that. A little bit about my course that I have. I actually have two courses. One is called API Fundamentals for Product Managers. It's for people that haven't really done APIs as a product manager before, learn the basics. And it starts April 17th. And there's a code here that you can use to get $100 off. We can, talk about in the Q&A if this is suitable for you or not. I do have another one that's called API Mastery for experienced product managers, which is for people that have shipped APIs. That's coming up on May the 1st. And, this is going to be the second iteration of my course. We did the first iteration. People loved it. Some people are here on the call. It's good to see them on here that they came back for more. And really want to talk about the API product manager opportunity. Look, APIs are and platforms also. They're more important than ever in the age of AI, but yet there are few of us, few API and platform product managers. And when you compare to the outsized importance of APIs, any way you measure it, like for example, there's more internet traffic from APIs than anything else. And if you're looking to get into API product management, theoretically, at least you get paid more, according to data I saw from Levels FYI. So do think about that. Do think about how you get into API product management, how you level up with API product management. And with that, let's go to Q&A. I see some questions in the chat. So, Derek, have you got any questions picked that you want to go with right now?
I'm taking a look at the chat real quick. So talk about Pendo a little bit.
Yeah.
We also support GraphQL, SOAP APIs. You can also even ingest custom event data. If you do have, say backend jobs that you want to track as well. We sometimes see this with, data processing platforms and want to understand when a job completes and was it successful and how many rows. Um, the I guess Grafana question, this goes back to, what are you trying to track, right? So if you're trying to track, purely, DevOps, more operational metrics, that's where Grafana is going to be, a better tool. If you're trying to understand business value and more product metrics, that's where most of them come in, and especially with a lot of the alerting AI features, detecting anomalies. So it's not just about logging in every day, but how do you actually really find the needle in the haystack to move the needle, for your own business, right? Because after all, after the last few years of trying to be more efficient, as a product manager, key thing is how can you actually experiment as quick as possible with the self-service capabilities, self-service analytics.
Somebody asked the question about can I bring my own fine-tuned LLM?
At the moment, no.
Mm,
We're using Azure OpenAI underneath the hood, and then you can tune, some of the anomaly detection and stuff that we have, but they're more the tuning of the parameters and not necessarily bringing in your own LLM. With that said, there's a lot of stuff on a roadmap, especially in the AI area,
mhm.
to not only just do the explaining that I'm showing right now, but to even generate reports and generate new things, through a conversational interface. So a lot of exciting stuff, especially around how to better leverage AI for the product analytics.
Cool. And I guess can you talk a little bit about some folks that have found success, either large or small organizations?
Sure, definitely. And so our customers span, mostly B2B / enterprise software businesses. We've seen a lot within the AI space, U.com and Peak and a few others, but also seen large traditional companies, right?
Mhm.
Folks like Siemens and London Stock Exchange,
Mm.
they're doing everything they can to make sure they have the best possible customer experience for their own customers, right? And so getting an understanding of, do they get value out of the APIs? If so, how much value? Where do they need to invest as an organization in their product strategy? That's some of the big things that we see, both at the startup level and also the large enterprise level.
Okay. And there was a question, I guess, around how do you set this up? You mentioned that talk to the engineers. They probably can put something, some plugin in the gateway, API gateway, or in the code, start the data collection. Deep was asking, is it mandatory to use your tool for data, for telemetry, for data collection, or is there something that you can plug into and use Moesif on top of that?
So in terms of data collection, you can either use our open source plugins for the API gateways or the server integration that we have for different languages. But you can also use our API directly, right? So you can, if you have a API log stream in Firehose or another, platform, event streaming platform like that, you can ingest that directly to Moesif. And then on the other side of the equation, what about getting data out of Moesif, right? And so, we support high-speed bulk export to your data warehousing platforms. If you need to get into some type of blob storage, you can do so, or query directly. We have a lot of folks that build custom developer experiences and customer experiences using the most of data. So, if you sign up for PandaDoc, for example, you might see they did a beautiful job, servicing API logs and usage metrics to their customers. It's actually most of underneath the hood, but you probably wouldn't see it because they did such a good job around
Which company is that?
design.
Which,
So
which company was that?
PandaDoc,
Okay.
PandaDoc.
Okay, cool. Okay, and I guess to wrap it up, you talked about the roadmap a little bit, doing stuff with AI. What's really exciting to you about APIs and AI? I mean, you mentioned MCP. Is that figuring on the horizon? What's exciting to you?
Yeah, so MCP, it's going to heavily drive, the consumption and usage of APIs and really making it front and center That gets me excited. Now, a new generation of companies are being created that is going to take data or workflows, expose it through APIs or MCP compliant server, to trigger those various functions. What gets me excited as well is just the sheer amount of data that organizations are sitting on and content that organizations are sitting on that are now being surfaced through APIs in different ways, either for other customers to train on that data, to use that data, integrate that data. And as part of that, things like data quality and use of data is now important. And so,
Mhm.
getting in good analytics and good reporting around, are customers actually getting crappy data, or is it actually data that is useful and high quality? And so building out those metrics around it is exciting to me. The other thing that gets me excited is, this pretty large transformation around what does it mean to monetize an API.
Mhm.
Just 5 years ago, most companies looked at monetization as a flat subscription, and you sign an agreement, and that was it. Nowadays, customers are looking for ways to be really paid just for what they need, and that's it, through these usage-based or outcome-based models. And so, and it's not necessarily just usage, right? Because I keep referring to API calls don't necessarily mean business value. And so building out a good pricing strategy in this new AI world doesn't necessarily mean you charge for API calls. It may mean you charge for something that the customer really cares about, which may mean how many leads were reached, or how many new text messages were sent, or something else that is aligned to really the business
It's
value and outcomes that they
it's the
expect.
outcome, and you have to be able to measure that outcome regularly and consistently to be able
Exactly.
to make pricing decisions, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody for participating and joining. And hopefully, a lot of you get hands-on with this demo. You'll be able to use it beyond this call. And you'll get the slides, recording, and links, and the discount on the course we talked about, and some bonus materials in your email tomorrow. I do have more lightning lessons coming up. If you enjoyed this, the next one is on building your own API prototype in 20 minutes using AI, and that's actually pretty action-packed and pretty fun to do. That's happening next week. I'll paste the link in here where you can find all of my sessions. And yeah, do join us for free sessions. Do go and explore Moesif. And Derric, if you want to drop an email in that people can find you at and ask questions, I think that would be helpful. Perfect.
Yeah, definitely reach out if you have questions around either Mosif or just in general how to be better API product manager.
All right. Thank you all so much. And, go out and use and try all this stuff and become a better product manager. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, folks.